Photoshop CS6 is announced, and it's waiting for you to try. You'll love the new art and photography filters, erodible and airbrush tips, and numerous other Just Do It features. Watch this video, and you'll learn all these features and more. Adjusting Photoshop's interface color. The first feature you'll notice in Photoshop CS6 is the dark interface color. You can change the color theme by pressing Shift plus F1 to darken the interface, or Shift F2 to lighten. You can also access this by going to the Photoshop or Edit menu, Preferences, Interface. Photoshop CS6 auto-saves the day. Have you ever had Photoshop crash on you, then realized that you didn't save your document? New in Photoshop CS6 is Autosave, which will automatically save a backup copy of your PSD every 10 minutes. You can adjust the frequency of autosaves by going to the Photoshop or Edit menu, Preferences, File Handling. Here you can tell Photoshop how frequently you want to auto-save your files. In addition to auto-save, Photoshop can save files in the background. This means you can continue working in Photoshop without having to wait for it to finish saving your file. Better layers management. Sometimes finding the right layer can take up quite a bit of time. The new Layers palette lets you search layers by kind, name, effect, mode, attribute, or color. For example, if you want to find the layer for this text with a drop shadow layer style, you can just set the filtering mode to Effect, then select Drop Shadow from the drop-down menu. To turn off layer filtering, just click the red switch on the top right corner. Photoshop CS6 also fixes some bugs and makes it easier to edit multiple layers. You can now use the Ctrl-J or Command-J keyboard shortcut to duplicate multiple layers. You can even select multiple layers to change the blending modes, blocking modes, opacity, and even apply color labels. Finally, layer groups work like layers. You can clip layers and apply layer styles to groups without having to convert groups into smart objects. Create dashed and dotted lines with the new shape layers. In Photoshop CS5, vector shapes were really just solid color fill layers with vector paths. In Photoshop CS6, this has been replaced with shape layers, and they work just like Adobe Illustrator. You have your fill and stroke color, fill and stroke styles, and outline patterns. With shape layers, you can now easily create dashed and dotted lines. How to use the new crop tool. The crop tool has been completely changed, and it can be confusing at first, but you'll get used to it. When you have the crop tool selected, Photoshop will automatically create a crop box of your entire document, so that you can just drag the corners to crop. Moving the crop area works in the opposite direction. Instead of dragging the crop box like in Photoshop CS5, you would be dragging the image. Think of it as moving a piece of paper around. If you extend the crop box beyond your image boundaries, you'll see a preview of the background. Photoshop will crop your image non-destructively so that you can uncrop your image at a later time. If you want to disable this, checkmark Delete Cropped Pixels in the options bar. You can also change the Rule of Thirds overlay to one of 5 different overlays in the option bar. Press the O key on your keyboard to cycle through the overlays, but make sure you have the crop area selected before you press O, or else you will switch to the Dodge tool. Other hotkeys to try are X to rotate the crop box 90 degrees and R to manually enter in the width, height, and resolution you want the crop to. If you want to start over, right-click and choose Reset Crop. Don't like this new crop tool? You can disable it by going into the tool settings and checkmarking the Use Classic Mode setting. New ways to use content-aware technology. The content-aware fill feature in Photoshop CS5 was great for removing objects, but it can sometimes sample from the wrong areas. Photoshop CS6 resolves this by letting you choose where to sample from. To do this, select the Patch tool, set the mode to Content Aware, create a selection of the object, then drag from the selection to the area that you want Photoshop to fill from. If you're not getting the results you like, you can play around with the adaptation setting in the option bar. The new Content Aware Move tool lets you move objects from one area to another using content-aware technology. It works great on images with a simple background, but not so great on complex scenes. As with any content-aware tools, you can now set the adaptation setting in the option bar to tell Photoshop how precise its content-aware technology should be. The Content-Aware Move tool also doubles as an Extend tool, simply by changing the mode to Extend. You can think of it as changing from Cut and Paste mode to Copy and Paste. It works the same way as the Content-Aware Move tool. Create a selection of the object, then drag to copy it to the new area. Brush tool. If you're a digital painter, you'll love the new brush feature, erodible and airbrush tips. The erodible brush tips let you draw lines where your brush erodes from thin lines to thick lines, just like a crayon. When it gets too thick, you'll need to sharpen the tip by clicking the Sharpen Tip button on the brush palette. You can set a hotkey for this button by going to Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts. Select Tools from the drop-down menu, then scroll all the way down to find the Sharpen Erodible Tips command. Enter a hotkey that isn't already taken, then click OK. There are also 5 erodible tips you can choose from: point, flat, round, square, and triangle. You can use airbrush tips to simulate the effects of an airbrush. Pressing harder would simulate the airbrush being closer to the paper, which would create thin lines. You can also tilt your brush for angular effects. To use all the features, you'll need a pen tablet with tilt sensitivity, like the Wacom Intuos 5. In addition to the brush tip settings, the maximum brush size has been increased from 2500 to 5000 pixels. There's also a new way to adjust your brush size and hardness. Hold Alt, then right-drag anywhere to bring up the live brush settings. Drag horizontally to adjust the brush size, then vertically to adjust the hardness. The new text tools. Web and graphic designers will love the new features in the text tool. You can now paste random filler text known as lorem ipsum, which is great for demonstrating the graphic elements of your document. To do this, create a text area, then go to Type, Paste lorem ipsum. Also notice the new Type menu. You can find many text settings here without using the flyout menu in the Characters panel. In the Character panel, open type features are easily accessible at the bottom of the panel. Finally, you have the character and paragraph styles where you can save text style presets. This is great for designers who want to use a consistent typography throughout their works. Adaptive Wide-Angle Filter. Photographers now have more control over their wide-angle photos with the new Adaptive Wide-Angle Filter. This filter corrects distortions in ways that the lens distortion filter can't. You can straighten curved edges just by drawing lines, and it works magically. If your photo has camera metadata and Photoshop has the profiles for it, you can use Auto Mode to have Photoshop do most of the work for you. This filter also works as a smart filter, which means you can convert your layer into a smart object, apply the filter, then go back and edit the settings at any time. Oil Painting Filter. Like artistic filters, there's a new oil paint filter which turns your photos into oil paintings. You can adjust the brush strokes length, smoothness, size, and depth. In addition, you can also apply an embossed effect with the lighting settings. Selective Blurring. Selective blurring has been increasingly popular in the photography world, and Photoshop CS6 makes it even easier to do with these new blur tools. You can apply field blur, iris blur, or tilt shift. Unfortunately, these blur filters are not available as smart filters. Color Lookup Adjustment. There's a new adjustment in the Adjustments palette, and one that everyone will like. The Color Lookup Adjustment looks technical, but when you click on the drop-down menus, you will find presets you can pick from. These are color profiles to simulate the color of films, monitors, and other devices. These profiles are great for video, but you can use them as photo effects for your still images. Photoshop CS6 comes with 32 profiles with the option to load more. Camera Raw 7. Photoshop CS6 uses the same Camera Raw found in Lightroom 4, and it gives better results and more room for recovery. The new process for adjusting images makes more sense. You start from the top and work your way down. Also, the tonal adjustments now start at 0, which means you can adjust the settings in both directions. Better video editing capabilities. More people are using their DSLR to record videos, and now you can edit those videos all inside Photoshop with a timeline panel. Photoshop CS6 doesn't replace video editing software like Adobe Premiere, but the video editing capabilities has been improved so much that you might not need to use other video editing software. Tracks are linked to layers, and you can apply layer styles and adjustments just like how you can with images. You can also apply simple video transitions to your clip. If you'll be editing videos in Photoshop, note that the videos won't be saved in your PSD. Instead, Photoshop will link to the videos, which means that if you're sending the PSD to someone else, you'll need to send the video files along with your PSD. 3D Objects. Working with 3D objects in CS6 is quite different. Firstly, the Repoussé tool has been replaced. We'll tell you more about this later. Additionally, the UI went through a major overhaul to resemble something more similar to other 3D software. There's a day and night difference in the 3D performance with the new Mercury graphics engine in CS6. You can make adjustments smoother than you can in CS5, and even preview shadows and reflections without rendering the scene. Unlike Photoshop CS5, where you can only edit one mesh at a time, CS6 will let you edit multiple meshes at a time. non-destructive 3D type. Back in Photoshop CS5, if you wanted to make 3D text, you'd use the Repousse tool, which is pretty easy to use. The downside to Repousse is that it would rasterize your texts. Example, if you made a spelling mistake, you couldn't fix it without undoing everything. In Photoshop CS6, the Repousse tool is replaced with the Properties panel, the same one you use to edit adjustment layers. The new way to convert 2D text into 3D text is to select the text layer, switch to the Text tool, then click on the 3D button in the Options bar. Photoshop will ask you if you want to switch to the 3D workspace. Just click Yes. Select the text object in the 3D palette, and all the Repousse settings can be found in the Properties panel. Made a typo? Just click on the Edit Source button in the Mesh tab to change your text. There are many new features in Photoshop CS6 to explore. The Liquify tool now uses the Mercury graphics engine so that you can liquify photos with no lag, and the max brush size has been increased from 1500 pixels to 15,000 pixels. Remember the lighting effects filter in CS5 where you could get a tiny preview window? Photoshop CS6 threw that away and replaced it with a gigantic preview area that's accelerated with Photoshop's new Mercury graphics engine. The Fill tool has a new feature called Scripted Patterns. These are 5 presets that alter the way you fill patterns. You can fill patterns using brick fill, cross weave, random fill, spiral, or symmetry fill. Unfortunately, the usefulness of these scripted patterns are limited because there are no parameters you can set. If you use the auto adjustments in Photoshop, you might notice that the results are slightly different. This is because of the new algorithm called Enhanced Brightness and Contrast, which produces more stable color results. If you want to change it back, just click on the flyout menu in the Properties panel for any adjustment with the Auto option, then choose Auto Options. The default algorithm used in Photoshop CS5 is the Enhance Per Channel Contrast. Finally, the Color Range Selection tool has a new mode to make selecting skin tones easier. You can now select skin tones, and if your image has a face, Photoshop will let you enable the Detect Faces option, which uses face detection technology to more accurately find skin tones. Other improvements include the gradient fills, which lets you adjust the scale to 1000%, up from 150%, Eyedropper tool, which lets you sample from the current layer and below, and Magic Wand tool, where you can adjust the sample size in the options bar. Thank you for watching this video. You can try Photoshop CS6 today by clicking on the download link in the video description. Subscribe to us for more great Photoshop tutorials.